Okay, once again, welcome everybody to the Wisconsin Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired Professional Mentor Webinar. Today, our guest is Cheryl Orgas with ABLE, Adult Braille Literacy Enhancement. So Cheryl, would you like to introduce yourself, and then I will start with the questions.
Sure. I'm Cheryl Orgas here in Shorewood, Wisconsin. I'm hybrid. I work some in my office location downtown at the library, and I work some in my home office here in Shorewood. And I'm the executive director of Audio and Braille Literacy Enhancement, otherwise known as ABLE.
All right. And Cheryl lives in a great neighborhood, as I used to be neighbors with her and Bill, so that was fun. So Cheryl, if you could please begin by telling a little bit about yourself, your job title, and what your job involves, and how long you have worked there.
Sure. Well, I will start by saying I am totally blind. I've been blind my whole life. I was born prematurely, so I'm one of the ROF babies, retinopathy of prematurity, ROP, excuse me. It used to be a different name. In any case, my twin sister is not blind. As many of you know, ROP happens with the combination of being in an incubator and too much oxygen and light that damages the retinas. So I grew up as a twin. We always had to compete with each other. So honestly, it helped me stay more on track with what my sighted peers were doing as children as we grew. It was interesting to have that as a backdrop, to have a twin sister in the sighted world. In my present job, I am the executive director of Audio and Braille Literacy Enhancement, and I've been here since 2007. I love this job. I have great passion for this work. As director, my role is to make sure that we get Braille, tactile, and audio materials in the hands of blind and print-disabled individuals. I have a team of 10 people that I supervise. When I started in 2007, we had a team of 3 of us. So we've grown dramatically. We've become quite expert at doing tactiles and just hired a new person in August. We are premier Braille transcribers. We have a certified Brailleist in UEB. We have a Nemeth transcriber working on this tremendously challenging new Braille, the Braille Nemeth class. And so we also have a team of audio people. So I'm talking more about them than me. And part of why that is because my job is to supervise them, quote unquote. So in my role as director, I'm managing the big picture, whether it be supervising staff, making sure the jobs are getting done, making sure that we are doing accurate Braille and tactile and audio tasks. It's my job to find the money, and I need to find this year $300,000. Last year I needed to find $290,000. I was able to find $80,000 more than we needed, which makes this year look really good. I've already heard from the auditors. My job is to make connections, to create bridges between organizations like WCBVI, the Library for the Blind, the Milwaukee Public Museum, and many other organizations. What I like to say about ABLE is we are everywhere where a blind or print-disabled person may need accessible materials. We're very busy And yet we know that there is much more work out there to be done. That's what I would say so far.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I forgot to mention, we will open it up for questions at the end, but you can also feel free to type questions in the chat now. So yes, Cheryl, I have received things that you guys have brailled, including like Milwaukee Brewers schedules, and I know you also do the Summerfest schedules. I'm not sure if those are in braille, but audio. So I can attest to some of those things. Next question is, can you explain the path that led you to this job?
I have a long and winding path to this job. I will start with my career path. In high school, I always wanted to be a helper. I wanted to be a psychiatrist and work with people around mental health issues. As I traveled through my high school years, I would do interviews with different professionals. By the time I hit college age, I decided to go to Lawrence University in Appleton to get a psychology degree. I wanted a strong base. I received my undergraduate degree and realized that what I really wanted to do was become a therapist. And a psychiatrist certainly can do therapy, but a psychiatrist manages a lot of medications and doesn't always have the luxury of one-on-one ongoing mental health therapy. I did some research in my area and looked at what would be the best master's degree to do what I wanted to do. And in our area, a master's in social work gets you to that end route the easiest, most efficiently. So I did get a master's degree at UWM, Milwaukee, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, in social work. In the process of doing that, I received an internship. Everybody has to do an internship. And I went to Women and Family Psychotherapy Resources. Right off the bat, I will tell you, I worked with the professional who matches people with internships, and she's like, oh, I just don't know where we're going to put you. So I already started to feel that issues of somebody not really knowing about blindness and what people's capacity was. So you know what? I went and I found my own internship. I remember meeting with this couple who were the owners of Women and Family Psychotherapy Resources. And you might think, oh, I was worried about blindness or what I would say. The reality, that was a freaky interview. And it was a freaky interview because this was the most unique couple. We had lunch and they were sitting across from me and they were both having independent conversations with me. I thought, oh, if I survive this, I can survive anything. So I needed to attend to both people independently in their conversations. It was the most bizarre interview I've ever had in my whole life to the present. So they did take me on as an intern, and the work there was so diverse. I was able to do 2 years of internship at Women and Families, and they hired me to be a therapist. So that was my first route to do what I thought I would do the rest of my life, and that was individual psychotherapy. I had a heavy caseload of people dealing with trauma, sexual abuse, incest, and family dealing with domestic violence. So it's a very, very intense, heavy caseload. At the same time, I was also working at the Women's Center of Waukesha. It was a second route that I had taken, independent of my therapy practice. So while in in finishing my graduate degree, I also needed a regular day-to-day job to pay the bills. So I interviewed at Sister House. It was a shelter for battered women. And another really odd story around blindness. I interviewed with Roz. She said to me, "You wouldn't say this anymore today." This was, oh my apologies, my computer is talking at me. So you wouldn't say this today, but in 1982, she said, "I don't know as a blind person how you're going to do this job, but you answered all the questions right, so I'm just going to hire you." So this woman said to me, "I don't know how a blind person can do this job, but I'm not going to let my own biases get in the way because you interviewed well. Why shouldn't you have the chance at a job?" What's important about that is we none of us never know how many people don't hire us because they've let their own biases about blindness get in the way. So I worked at Sister House. It was a shelter for battered women. So that meant many times I was the only staff person in a big house that could house up to 15 to 20 moms and children. And I did overnight shifts. So I would have to let people in and out. I'd have to deal with the alarms. I would have to make sure that the place was secure. And I did individual counseling. That job actually led me to that connection with the couple I told you about earlier that then hired me as a therapist after my internship. So I did both those jobs for a while, and then my dream job opened up. I love group work. I love group work to this day. I interviewed at the Counseling Center of Milwaukee to be a group coordinator. So in 1988, while still having my private practice, I moved to the counseling center. I ran group trainings. I would have anywhere between 8 to 12 people in my trainings at a time. As a blind person, everybody else, it's seldom that I had a blind person actually in my trainings. And I ran that program until 2007. Back in 2005, something was happening in the group work world. The computers took hold back in the late 90s, early part of the century. People were starting to get their support, even though I would tell you it's not as good, it's not as consistent, but people would get support online. And so we were having fewer people attend our groups. So I would train facilitators and then I would coordinate groups that the facilitators ran. And back in the 90s, we would have 10 to 12 people in our groups. And back in 2005 or 6, I'd be lucky to get 3 or 4 people. So you can guess what's happening. The writing's on the wall. I don't know how much longer this job is going to work for me. So the job at Audio and Braille Literacy Enhancement, formerly Volunteer Services, opened up as director. I'm thinking, oh, I've never been a director. I don't know if I can do that job. And actually, I interviewed for that job in 2005. At that time, I'm married by this point. I married in 1989, and we had a son in 93. So Christopher was maybe 5th grade at that point. And I decided maybe it wasn't time yet to switch careers. So I decided not to follow through, which, you know what? It's okay to change your mind about something. I think sometimes we think we must do something if we've started a process. So case in point, I didn't continue that process. Well, the job opened up again at the end of 2006. It's like, now's my time. I sat down with my husband and now my 7th grader, and I said, "Now this is going to be a big job. I'm going to be having a lot more responsibility. You are all going to need to share in the cooking." Well, I became a really good director, but I will tell you, I didn't necessarily succeed in getting them to cook dinners at night. but I did become a very good executive director. So that's the path that brought me to my job today. If I was to say a summary of what connected everything, it was that early on I developed my relationship skills, that I made connections with people wherever I worked. I learned my job really well so that when I traveled to the next opportunity, that I would have really good references to follow me. And I followed my passion. I've always done work that I really wanted to do, and it was time to move on. I looked for the next opportunity that gave me passion and created commitment. So that's my path. That's kind of my windy path to my work today, Dave.
Great answer. Thank you so much.
This is Kay. We have a question in the chat that's related to what you just said.
Sure.
Looking back, what experiences and training best prepared you for this job? And you kind of answered, but if you wanted to say more.
At the counseling center, I was responsible for writing reports, and I started learning about the funding climate and what was important in nonprofits. So that was key to taking on this next job. My group work really helped me as a supervisor, so that I could really make the connections among staff. I have a very strong, committed team that work together well. In my organization, we don't have any, for the most part, we don't have any people, talking behind people's backs or dealing with, things that aren't talked about. We talk about things up front. And I believe that even though I'm not a social worker, I don't pretend to be a social worker. That's not my job. I feel like all those skills taught me how to be a really good supervisor and a strong connector among people.
Thank you. So it sounds like you were doing advocacy from an early age.
I was, absolutely.
Yeah, and just as an aside, my first memory of meeting you, Cheryl, was on a bold trip. We left Milwaukee to go up north skiing, I think to Upper Michigan, and picking you up at St. Lawrence College.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I loved college. I loved those 4 years. I learned a lot.
Awesome. So the next question, please share some of the greatest rewards and challenges to your job.
I will just say upfront, I am passionate about the work I do. I just love being at Able. I've said, maybe I'll stay another 5 years, and I'll be honest, I'm 64 now. And people say, well, you keep on saying 5 years and you never change the number. So I'm hoping that I will know when it's time to leave before people have to tell me. I just feel so passionate about our work. It's greatly rewarding to know that we are getting Braille into the hands of blind children and adults, and that we're doing such amazing tactiles. What I didn't say about Able is that in the 60s, this organization put my materials into Braille, and the organization was started by my teacher of the visually impaired and other Milwaukee leaders. So many other parts of the country, kids were growing up without any Braille. Sister Mel Marie Stoll, she would not have tolerated that. I remember volunteers telling me, oh my gosh, she was so picky. And I guess she wanted books a certain way. They weren't the normal way, so you'd have to cut paper a certain way. But I always had Braille every day in my classroom. And it's because of this organization that she started. When she was sent to school to be a teacher of the visually impaired, she came back to Milwaukee and she said, well, this is great, but I need Braille materials. So I have to say, I am so proud and privileged to carry on Sister Mel's legacy. I love that we have an audio studio, that we used to do books on cassette, and I was panicked when we moved over to digital. What is Able going to do? We built a $200,000 studio. We have 2 sound rooms, and our books that we record for the Wisconsin Talking Book and Braille Library were circulated 12,000 times in 2023. That makes me so proud. I'd say the challenges in my work, ironically, people say, wow, what are there blindness challenges? Honestly, the challenges are like what other directors are facing in my field, and that is finding money. I'm always looking to where are there new dollars, where are there different dollars. Before some of you came on, this is still not public, but we have another Braille book that we're going to be releasing, and somebody in the fall said, well, we'd like to sponsor a Braille book. Well, I can guarantee you I was on the phone getting those dollars. I'm always looking for more dollars so that we can continue to do the work we do. It's a funny thing. It's kind of a side point, but there's no doubt that there's stigma and there's discrimination and there's challenges to blindness. But some of what I've found is that what I thought would be hard isn't what's hard. It's the same things that are hard that other people find are hard. So I'll give you a side story. We're blind parents of a sighted child, and before he was born, we're terrified and like, oh, diapers. I've never done any diapers. Well, any of you who've done diapers in your life for your little ones, it doesn't take too many diapers for it to become, pretty rote. So it wasn't diapers that were the issue. It's when, friends picked on Christopher, or when parents, dealing with parents and their pettiness and just dealing with the challenges of life, dealing with a teenager who didn't want to listen anymore. So it's so ironic that yes, there are blindness challenges, but some of the challenges are just the same as other people. And that's what I find in this work is any other executive director of a small nonprofit, they all say that's the challenges are money. So we're doing a good job. And again, it's about making relationships and building bridges.
Well, thank you. What are some of the blindness skills that lead to success in your job?
One of the most important skills that really come back to the O&Ms on this call, the orientation mobility instructors, is having really good mobility skills, orientation and mobility. And I grew up at a time where little kids didn't get canes, and I didn't get a cane until middle school. And I balked at that point. And so it was a struggle for a while, but I really needed to be able to travel in my environment and be comfortable in my environment. So as I said earlier, much of my adult life, actually, I worked in jobs that were not in the blindness field. I needed to be able to walk in a room of 10 to 12 trainees and feel comfortable getting to where I needed to be and, leading that group with confidence. I needed to be able to set up that room for others. I didn't have others setting up my space for me. I needed to be able to travel to different parts of the city and go to task force meetings and committee meetings and meet with directors of other organizations. So all that I do today, it grew from getting some really strong mobility skills. We're late in coming, but I did kind of a rehab center program back when I was 18 and really developed strong travel skills. That is crucial to job success. It's one of those things that it's not on the job application, but you've got to be comfortable getting to and being in your space. Strong Braille skills. I have a Braille display. I have a Braille writer. I have a slate and stylus. I use all the tools at my fingertips. And right now, it's easier for me just to have my Braille notes, my questions here, just in hard copy Braille. I'm learning the Brilliant. I have used other Braille displays. And I have a Braille writer at my desk. So having those strong Braille skills are really helpful. Many times I just take a slate and just jot down a few notes in a meeting. So Braille has been really essential for me. And I will say it's kind of tandem to skills. It's more about a philosophy, being comfortable as a blind person, being comfortable in one's own body. And part of what helped with that is having connections with other blind people. First of all, growing up, I was in a resource room for the blind, and then we were placed in the regular classroom. So having other blind friends growing up was crucial. That's the beauty of, I think, the Wisconsin Center and the Wisconsin School, and having the programs where even if kids are in schools in their own communities, that they can come to you for kind of intense learning environments, because it's really important to have other blind people supporting one. And then in my adult world, became very involved in the National Federation of the Blind. And so if I didn't think I could do something, I knew where to go to find out if I could, rather than people saying, oh, I don't think blind people can do that. So I guess that's kind of in tandem with blindness skills, but it's really that attitudinal skills that have really helped me get, be really confident every job I've ever gotten. I remember I forgot about a job, actually. I was at the task force on family violence for a time. And when I interviewed, one of the women said, people give us so many cues, nonverbal cues. How, as a blind person, are you going to know what people are telling you? My answer, and to this day, it is true. As a therapist, if you've ever been a therapist, I've said it's not missing those cues, but people give us so many cues and so much information. It's actually sorting out what's important. So really having the confidence to say that when they're saying to me, I don't know how you can be a therapist, you'll miss some things. So building that attitude as well as having the skill set.
Cheryl, this is Kay. There's another question from an O&M.
Sure.
How do you convince teenagers to connect with other peers that are visually impaired, like attending a camp or joining a social group?
Oh, that is a good question. And my personal feeling is that children need to connect with other blind children when they're young. So that's something that's just automatic. Now, that I know that doesn't answer the teenager that lost their sight in their teenage years. I think that the next best thing is trying to find a mentor for that teenager. I think it's really tough in the teen years. In fact, I think there's a question coming up on that I can also respond to, but it's really helpful to find out how other blind people are traversing the world. And teens, they don't want to be blind, they just want to be like everybody else. So it's a challenge.
And I just wanted to, since these webinars are geared toward young job seekers, I wanted to cite the statistic, and I might need help by Dave Hyde or use Cheryl, but I think is it that for employed blind people, is it 90% of them are Braille readers? Is that?
I've heard 90% and I've heard 80%. And what's striking about that, whether it be 80 or 90%, after all these years, there's still a statistic that says 70% of blind and physically disabled individuals are under or unemployed. So
Right.
of the remaining 30% who are gainfully employed, of those 30%, it's 80 or 90% use Braille on the job.
Yeah. So I always find that to be a very powerful statistic. So the next question, who are some of your mentors and how did they influence or motivate you?
Well, my first mentor was my dad, and my dad was he was a crusty guy. He was kind of a tough, crusty guy, and he just said, you can do anything you want to do. And so when I had a bad day, or when I felt like, the world just was telling me I couldn't, I would go home and he would tell me I could. So to have somebody in one's life that believes in you when the world is giving you a different message is so important. I don't know that my dad always did things the right way, but there was it was my counselor through DVR in high school, and we were always pushing the envelope, right? So my dad said one day, she's going to grow up and she could have your job. I'm like, I'm not sure how comfortable that made that DV. In fact, he sometimes referenced in years later my dad. So and certainly my dad made an impact. So I'm not saying that essentially it was the best advice, but what it says is my dad really believed in me, and I can't tell you, it makes me teary how important that was for me when I was feeling challenged. My mom struggled, and my mom was afraid and anxious. And when I was really little, I fell down the steps. And like, how many kids fall down the steps, whether you're blind or sighted? And he's like, what the heck? Stop babying her. Do you want her to be stuck with us when she's 50? So that's something my dad would say. And then my mom, when I went to London for a semester, very well-meaning aunt and uncle were over the night before, and they told her how terrible the drivers were in London. So my mom said, I don't think you should go. And honest to goodness, that is the night before I was going to fly to London. My dad didn't say anything to me that night, but my dad had instilled in me that belief that as painful as it was for me to go against my mom's wishes, I just said I have to go. If I hadn't gone, how many other times might I have said, "Oh, maybe it's too hard." So, if there isn't a parent out there, if it's you that can be that motivator for that student really needs that somebody that says you can do it. And then Sister Mel, Sister Mel was our teacher of the visually impaired. You just didn't mess with Sister Mel. she was tough. She had high expectations. That was a time when, things are stricter now. She had a brother who had a cabin and a lake. She would take us to the lake on the weekends. She would do things that really taught us how to be in the world. In fact, we would do lunches out. We had charm class. So it's somebody, again, that said, I've got to give these opportunities so that myself and my peers would grow up and have those experiences behind me. And then I always looked for people in my work that knew more than I knew, that could be mentors, that could be coaches, that I never was afraid to say, I don't know this. And how do I do that? So I'll tell you, there's always been somebody special in no matter where I worked that was a mentor and a motivator for me.
Thank you. A bit of a reflective question. Looking back to when you were high school age, what would you tell yourself, or what might you have done differently?
One of the things I would have liked to have been able to tell myself is that high school is a tough time for so many kids, and kids are so challenged to find themselves that they're not always very good at reaching out. And just because I don't have a whole slew of friends, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. That I found, in college, I found my niche, and always in my work world, I found people to connect with. I found friends. The toughest time was high school, and I wish I wouldn't have worried so much or felt um, so anxious about not connecting with others, that just finding a few people. And in fact, one of my greatest gifts was because I went through Resource Room for the Blind through grade school. When I went to high school, I was the only blind person in my high school, but I still had all those connections from grade school. But I was alone a lot, and I can remember going through the whole school day and not saying a word. And I really doubted myself. So if I had a magic wand to say, you know what, these are tough times, but you're going to be okay. So that is one thing. And the other is to find ways to be involved where you can. In fact, the little niches where I did make connections is I was in Latin club, and I did wear a toga, and I did go to the big Latin dinners, and um, I did things even though I didn't want to. That would be the second thing, is to challenge oneself to do something even though it's frightening. Those are probably the two big things. High school is tough. I've heard people say, "Oh, this high school years were the best years of my life." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" Never want to do high school again. I just think that's why the question of earlier, I feel for students. I just think it's really a tough time to find one's way. I think it's why the center is so important in having activities. I think organizations like the National Federation of the Blind are so important, that we need to create opportunities because they're so hard to find in those teen years.
Absolutely. Final question. What is the most important advice you can share with young job seekers?
Get out in the world and do things. Find places to volunteer. Uh, don't always worry about, am I going to make any money at this? I was a volunteer at, it was a crisis hotline. And that was a great place to be a volunteer because I wanted to be in the social work and mental health field. So I made lots of connections there. And I was able to practice my skills and learn things. And don't be afraid to talk to people. I was always looking to talk to people about their work. I remember, I don't know, there was an attorney. He's not an attorney now, but his name was John Carter. I remember calling him in high school because my dad wanted me to be an attorney. That would not have been a good match for me, but I think my dad wanted me to be settled and make lots of money. Anyways, I called John Carter. He's, I don't know, let's see. He's like 20 years older than I, and I'm a 18-year-old, and saying, well, what is it like to be an attorney? So, really questioning people, what kind of work do you do, and how do you manage that? So, just finding ways to show up places and get to be known in your community. Every job I've had a skill set to it. And every job I had, I knew somebody that before I took that job. The job at the at the counseling center, I actually had done this woman's group training. She had come to Women and Families, and I found out the day that job was closing for the coordinator of the group program. I said, "Oh no, that is my job." And that's the days when you didn't have a computer at work. I was going to work. I was doing therapy all day. I couldn't stay home. I couldn't call my clients and say, "I'm sorry, I've got something to do this morning." So I had a whole day of clients. I called her. I said, "Sue, that's my job, but I just found out you're closing today." She said, "Get me your resume by tomorrow morning." So I'm at home on the typewriter getting my resume together that night. Um, I wanted that job and I got that job. But that scares me to this day. Had I not, there was a fluke that I found out that day it was open. But she knew me. And of course she knew my skills. So she wanted me to have the job. But um it was a funny side thing. We were supposed to develop a training for one of the weeks. I misunderstood her. I thought she said I needed to design the whole training. So I came in, I designed the whole training. She's like, her first question was, "You're going to do this all in 1 week?" And I said, "Oh no, this is the 8-week training." So that actually might have gotten me the job because I'd already designed the training. So anyways,
Cheryl,
yeah,
sorry.
that's all I say. I've always known somebody before I've gotten the job.
Another question. What advice would you give to teenagers who are low vision, possibly may lose all sight, to get them to want to learn Braille when there is all of this accessible technology? The statistics of unemployment for those who are visually impaired is alarming. I don't know if they understand the challenges that could lay ahead.
I think first of all, if there are fun ways to help students get involved with Braille, and if we start looking at Braille as a functional tool, not that you're going to sit down and read volumes of work, but that if you can be in a meeting and take notes that you can give later, or if you're having to do a presentation, that you can have your Braille notes at hand. There are there are definitely skilled people who don't know Braille, but I know people who are giving presentations where they have an earbud in one ear while they're listening to their computer while they're doing it. It's like, that can be done, but how challenging that is versus having notes in front of you. So thinking about it more as a practical tool rather than, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to read volumes of Braille. I think that is one thing that helps, as well as making it fun.
Great answers. Wow, what a great interview.
Well, thank you. I just love talking about the trajectory of my work because it's not just about me, but it's about all the opportunities I've been given and all the people that trusted, that said, I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm just going to trust.
Right. Are there any questions from the audience?
Here's another one. Do you know of some resources for students to get connected with other students who have a visual impairment, even if it's an online group? My students are on the opposite side of Wisconsin than where a lot of services are being offered. And I'll just chime in that our short course team, Megan Friedel and Jesse Grober, have been having online social hours. So Lindsay, I'll send that connection to you.
Certainly, the National Federation of the Blind has a student division. That can be a possibility. I'm involved with the Wisconsin Parents of Blind Children. We do activities, and we're having some younger teens start to participate in our Lions Camp event in it's late September, early October. And I'm thinking of one particular young boy. He's been attending maybe 4 or 5 years, and he's 14 now. And I just see his growth and his confidence. So having those weekend opportunities, I know there's is it Amy Lehman put out? I think it's Amy Lehman. Is that right, Kay? That she has a listserv where a lot of things are being put out, including, the parent division puts our things out there, and I know other groups do. And once in a while, Vision Forward has done a teen group, but it is actually hard to maintain because it's kind of a moving target. Sometimes teens want something and then they don't, or you know they want to do something fun and not necessarily talk about things. So
yeah, I would definitely, I don't have Amy's contact right now, Amy Lehman, but Lindsay, I would definitely connect with Megan and Jesse on that social hour, because it's been going quite well with all the different age groups.
And I certainly am wearing my hat of the Audio and Braille Literacy Enhancement Director, but my other hat, my volunteer hat, is I'm a part of the Wisconsin Parents of Blind Children. So, you could contact me certainly about that, and if you do, I'll send you my home email address. And I have a lot of hats, so I have to switch them out once in a while.
And Cheryl, in fairness, because we're a state agency, I need to point out that there is a chapter of the American Council of the Blind in Wisconsin. Their president is a fellow by the name of Peter Heide. I think he lives somewhere up north. And I know that nationally, the American Council of the Blind has a student division. And then in addition to that, I think they've got a blind parents division. There are other agencies that put together classes for social. I know if you get out on Facebook, you will find a lot of groups doing various things. I have a friend up in Green Bay who is very involved in a blind video gamers group. I'm just amazed that he does it, because I have no idea how it can be done. But he's involved in making those accessible. So that's an exciting thing. And finally, get in touch with blind adults. Most blind adults can get you or your students in touch with blind students in schools. But I agree with Cheryl, it's essential that we have other blind and visually impaired people to talk to, because everybody works out ways of doing things, and some of them are always going to be a surprise to you.
It's a side point. Yeah, I was just going to say my husband is blind. And if you look around, many, not all, but many couples, both people are blind. That doesn't mean that it's always the case. But one of the reasons that works out really well is that we really understand each other's lives really, really well. And it just can really talk about things at a level that just you might not. Not that other people don't understand. I have a full range of friendships, both people who happen to be blind and people who happen to be sighted. And I think one of the reasons that is a success for me is because I'm comfortable within myself. Well, I hope I didn't wander on too long. I do. This kind of work is really important to me. That I want people to have the seeds of success.
Absolutely.